What's up, everybody? Hopefully, the audio is good. I have no way of knowing. You got the actual owner of the channel, Alternager, in the chat. I have hacked my mom's channel. We are going to kick off our new series of serial unalivers today. So, with that being said, I got a question for you. When you think of a grandma, your granny, your Mimi, your whatever y'all call them, I always just call mine grandma. What do you think of? And even if it's not somebody you're related to, what do you think of? The good old lady that's crossing the street that you help? The lady that, you know, is frail and brittle that you might help load groceries into their car? The person that always has the best treats and chocolates in their purse or in their house for you? The person that always brought a smile to your face anytime that you ever visited them? What if I was to tell you not all grannies are like that? This is why we're going to start this serial unaliver off with Granny Gone Wild. So, we're going to get right into the story. There was this lady back in the day, we'll say. Her name was Nanny Doss. But before she was Nanny Doss, she was Nanny Hazel. I am going to be referring to some notes here because there's a lot of information. So let's get into a little bit of backstory on Miss Doss, or Miss Hazel at this point in time. So she was born November 4th, 1905 in Blue Mountain, Alabama. But before we actually get to her, we got to get to her mother. So her mother went by Lou. Um, Lou got pregnant at a very young age. She was a teenager. And during that time, that was very, very frowned upon. So Lou's dad, he was a hardened man, let's say that, to be nice. Um, was very, very by the books and by the rules of that time period. To give example on how extreme he was, Lou would not tell him who the father, baby daddy, however you want to say it. I don't like the terminology baby daddy. So father of the child was. And it's always been speculated that either Lou didn't know who Miss Dawson's father was, or she didn't quote unquote want to ruin that man's life. But Lou's dad took it to such an extreme. One day he actually lunged at Lou and said, "I'll beat the problem out of you." Luckily, Lou's mom stopped that. Um, but after that, Lou left, and she's like, "You know what? Like, I'm not gonna deal with this. I'm not gonna be having this. I'm gonna raise this child regardless." And she actually never disclosed who the father was. So she ended up going and renting out a room in Blue Mountain, Alabama, which is where she had Nancy, better known as Nanny, was her nickname. Oddly enough, about a week after she had Nanny, she was given a proposal. And I'm telling you right now, if somebody gave me this proposal, I would probably call the cops because I'd be like, you're out of your mind. But, it's the very early 1900s. I wasn't born then, so I don't know. There was a struggling farmer that came up to her and gave her a proposal that was, "I'm gonna marry you," which Lou was looking for because back in 1905 when Annie was born, having a baby out of wedlock, that was a no-no. And so he proposed that, let's get married. I'll raise his child, but in return, I want help with work on the farm. And Lou agreed. So they get married, and that is where he signed the birth certificate and everything. And that is where her birth given name was Nancy Hazel. So they get settled down on this farm. I think his farm was cotton or something like that. I honestly I can't remember. And they start trying to make a family, start trying to get in the swing of things. You know, the rumor mills are going, but they slowly started to die down now that everybody's getting more into the swing of things. And this is where Lou realized that everything that she left back home, the abuse and stuff that she had left back home, he just married right into it. And so it was said that Mr. James Hazel um, was 10 times worse than Lou's dad could have ever thought of being. He was a bully, had a very, very, very short temper, was very controlling. If things did not go his way or you disobeyed him, you were going to get the wrath of him. And it was said that Lou realized that pretty much right off the bat. Right when they got into the swing of things and me and a family, then she realized, you know, what she had just done. But she did not leave. Um, there's been a lot of speculation on why, but there was never any solid answer on why she did or did not leave. Just as there's no solid answer if James Hazel was actually her biological father or not, and it was a cover up or what have you. Um, so he was very devoted to his farm. He cared more about his farm than he cared about his own life. That is actually a quote from James. I care about this farm more than I care about the own air that I breathe. And so with that, Lou was given endless chores. If you guys know anything about farms, the chores are endless to begin with, but it's even harder when somebody just keeps piling them on. When Nanny could walk, that's when she was given her first chore. And it didn't stop there. As she got a little bit older, um, she wasn't allowed to go to school because James said the chores were more important and chores needed to get done, so therefore she did not have time for school. Um, but James, he was very, very calculated to the extent he planned the next 4 births of his children. And I mean, down to the T. When Lou would be off work, the time of the season that Lou would be off work, how long she would be down for, what Nanny could pick up during that time, what he could pick up during that time. It was insane. And but he ended up giving birth to 3 more daughters and 1 son. As time still progressed, he didn't change at all. He was still incredibly strict, but he was even more strict on his daughters. To the extent he did not allow his daughters to wear dresses, they had to wear boy clothes. They were not allowed to brush their hair or anything of that nature because he said men are animals, and if you do the slightest thing to appeal them, they will pounce. So, fast forward just a little bit. Imagine you have a 7-year old, because this is the time that Nanny was 7, and your 7-year old experiences a traumatic brain injury. What would you do? Most of us, and I would hope all of us, would immediately take them to a hospital, go see a doctor, something. And but did good old James do that? No. So when Nanny was 7, she was on a train with her parents to go visit some family. During that time, there was actually a really bad storm that came through, and a branch had fell across the train tracks. So, as any good train conductor would do, slammed on the brakes. When that happened, Nanny went flying forward and she ended up smacking her head right off the bar, like right in front of her, the railing in front of her, and actually gave her a severe traumatic brain injury. This was never looked at, it was never addressed. James said he did not have time to take her to a doctor because the time spent taking her to a doctor is the time spent that she could be doing chores and that it was not necessary. So, with that, she had a traumatic brain injury that went untreated for virtually the rest of her life. So, that came along bad headaches, really bad depression spells. Um, Everybody that knew her, that they said it was like a complete 180 in her personality. That she became very violent, would black out at times, would just pass out, dizzy spells, you name it, she had it. And it just continued to kind of like get worse and worse and worse. So as time went on, James started to treat her differently than he did the 100% those are biologically his kids. And she started to resent him for it, and for a good reason. This one, I don't blame her on. I would do the same thing. James would allow his family or close friends or Joe Blow down the side of the road, if he had enough money, to come and have relations with Nanny. I'm not disrespecting that. I just have to be careful with YouTube regulations on how I say that. Um, but it happened at a very young age and it happened often. And it went on for a very, very long time. On top of that being an issue, James told her that it was her fault that it happened. As she got a little bit older, there was one in particular day that Nanny talks about. And it was all she was simply doing was brushing her hair. Her dad, James, Mr. Hazel, comes in, sees her brushing her hair, says that she's trying to look pretty for a boy, again, reiterates men are animals and all, if you give them, basically, if you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. And continued to beat her with the brush, the cane, and anything that was in arm's reach of him. And it was, from what I read, it was a brutal beating. So she stopped doing that. Obviously, she didn't. I mean, she's just trying to be a preteen, like she's just trying to be a girl. But he was not allowing that to happen at all. Progress a little bit further. And the reason I'm going through this part so quickly is it is in the early 1900s. There's only so much that I could find on it. So progress into more teenage years, middle to late teenage years. The farm ended up hitting a downfall more than it already had, and Nanny was able to convince her dad to let her go get a job. So she went and found a job at the local thread mill, and that is where she met. If I can find it on here, I have way too many notes, and I'm getting my names confused. Charles. That is where she met Charles Braggs. So he was said to be a gentleman. He was a co-worker at the thread mill, but only 4 months after meeting, they married. Turns out, just a little spoiler alert, her dad actually knew all of this, and he arranged the entire thing to basically get her away from him and away from the family. As you can suspect, with somebody that is 16, Nanny, and 17, Charles, and only known each other for 4 months, this probably doesn't end well. Well, Charles was a mama's boy, and I'm not saying there ain't anything wrong with being a mama's boy, but Nanny thought that there was, because what she didn't know when she married Charles was that her mother-in-law would also be moving into the house with them. Her mother-in-law did not like Nanny at all. There was nobody on the face of this earth that was ever good enough for Charles. and never would be good enough for Charles in her eyes at that moment. So, um, they move in together. The mother-in-law moves in, and it's just downhill. Anytime that anything happens, Charles sides with his mom. It doesn't matter what Nanny does, it's Nanny's fault. And uh, Charles's mom just, I mean, Nanny's under a microscope. No matter, she could breathe wrong, and Charles's mom is criticizing it. And then Charles turns around and sides with his mom. Whether she's wrong, whether she's right, he sides with her. I do not understand this part, but again, it's a different day and age, and I've never been in this situation, so I don't know. Um, Nanny just puts in her head that the only way to maybe somewhat get out of this and have a happy life is to have children. And um, so they have 4 kids in 4 years, one each year. When she had her first, Melvina was her first daughter's name. That was like the love of her life. And like she absolutely worshipped that kid. And then the other three came along. But she realized nothing was changing. Her depression wasn't getting any better. The home life wasn't getting any better. Nothing was getting any better. It was actually just getting worse. So she turned to alcohol and smoking cigarettes back to back to back to back to back. She didn't want to work. She didn't want to do anything. And then she had a very, very dark thought one day. And that thought was, I would rather have one happy kid. This is a quote from her. I would rather have one happy kid and give it everything that it ever could want, and all the love and desire and hope that it ever could want, and it understand true love and what true love truly means and what it feels like, versus four unhappy kids that are absolutely miserable and wishes that they would just off themselves and or never be born. It's pretty dark. So this is where you're going to learn the very first part of a trend with Miss Nanny. She was home with her 4 kids one day as her husband was out either at work or having relations. At that point in time, we don't really know um, that particular day what he was doing, but he did like to have relations. Um, the 2 middle children, she gave them breakfast, and then the next day, they were dead. The oldest and the youngest is still alive. So she, panicking as a mom would do, you just woke up, 2 of your kids are dead, and just all in hysteria. And Charles, not being home, he comes home to this in the wee hours of the morning. He's got a crowd around his house of all the locals just surrounding his house, doctors, ambulances, police, you know, whoever, whatever, surrounding his house. He literally has to fight through the crowd just to get in his own house to see what's going on. And that's when he realizes his two middle children are deceased. So they ended up ruling it a poison in the grain that they had eaten. And there was no autopsy performed or anything. There was no reason for any suspicion, what have you, at that time. Um, and Charles, who was actually really well liked in the town, went from really well liked to really well hated because everybody was like, "Why aren't you there? Like, where were you at? Why aren't you there? Your 2 kids just died. WTF?" So, um, things did not get any easier. They ended up just splitting further and further and further apart. Before I go any further, this does not get any better. This actually gets about 20 times worse. So this is not for the faint of heart. I'm going to be as less descriptive as I possibly can, but still get the story across. So I'm just letting you guys know. As a disclaimer, this does not get better. It gets about 20 times worse. So let's get back into it. Um, so uh, while like right after that they passed, Nanny was adamant that her babies be laid to rest immediately, which was another reason that the autopsy was not ever done. She said that she did not want her babies to just lay there cold, and that she wanted them sent to heaven to see um, their maker as soon as they possibly could, so they could 100% be laid to rest peacefully. The town did not have any red flags to that, and they made sure that happened. Um, so they again, like I said, obviously didn't get any better. That's not going to save your marriage by any means. That's just going to make it worse, in which it did. And Charles was always really bothered by that. His kids were healthy, and at the moment, you know, she's left alone with him, and he knows that she's having these dark thoughts. Now you got two that are deceased. It's he thought about it, and he was so bothered by it that he ended up actually leaving. So when he left, he took the youngest, Florine was her name. He went to go. No, I'm sorry. He took Melvina. So, mind you, Melvina is Nanny's pride and joy. And so he took Melvina because she was laying in her crib by herself. He left his own mother there, his elderly mother there, and then left Nanny there, went to go take the youngest, Florine, but couldn't because she was asleep in Nanny's arms, and Nanny was also asleep, but he couldn't like get her from Nanny's grasp without waking her up. So he ended up taking Melvina and fled. That did not go well. Um, Nanny ended up going into a deeper and deeper and deeper depression, and then sooner rather than later, all the money ran out, and so she ended up actually going back to the thread mill and getting another job. And that's as good old Nanny will do, and as you will see, he found somebody else. Um, so she ends up finding somebody else. They don't make babies, don't get married, or anything like that. She ends up finding a few of these, but just kind of lets it go. Go back to her childhood on something that I actually forgot, which is a huge thing in this story, which I don't really understand why I forgot this part. While she was dealing with the beatings of her dad, her escape was love novels. She loved romance novels, absolutely loved them. And her thing was, if I could ever just find a Prince Charming, somebody to take everything away, somebody just to treat me correctly, you know, treat me how these books are written. That's what she strived for in life. And she ended up becoming obsessed with it. So fast forward. Now we're in 1928. So Nanny was born in 1905. Now we're in 1928. So in 1928, Charles ends up coming back home after about a year. I think it was a year because I think her last baby was born in 1927. So he ends up coming back home to his house that he owns, and is like, hey, who does he have with him? A newborn baby and his mistress. And he does not take that well, but she takes it a heck of a lot better than what she's gonna take some other things. So Charles ends up giving Melvina back and Florine. Like he lets her keep Florine and gives Melvina back. So again, she's like, All right, now I got to get back out here. I got to make some money. I got 2 kids now, and we got to make this thing happen. I got to keep a roof over my head. So, um, I'm trying to remember because there's one thing I know that I'm missing here. So she ends up going back, and then she finds this thing in the paper, and it's called. I should have this like right at the top, and I do not. Oh, the Lonely Hearts column in the paper. It's like the 1900s version of Tinder, something like that. I've never used Tinder before. Once. But she, along with her romance columns, becomes obsessed with this. So she gets divorced from Charles because he's got a mistress, he's got a new baby. She's happy that he gave Melvina back. She's got 2 kids, what have you. Then she meets Frank Harrelson. 2 months after meeting Frank Harrelson, he supposedly sweeps her off, or yeah, he sweeps her off her feet, and they are getting it. Probably more than one way than not. But they end up getting married. But again, this will turn out to be not the romance novel that Nanny read about and what she expected and what she wanted. And turns out Mr. Harrelson was drunk and he beat her, um, beat her bad. But this was actually the longest relationship that Nanny had. They actually went through this for 16 years. But everybody said when they were out on the town, out on the street, it was just like a romance novel. But behind closed doors, mm-mm, it was not like that. So they ended up moving. So they go from Blue Mountain, Alabama, to Georgia, Cedartown, Georgia, where Frank had taken a job, and um, this is um, where Frank got quite the reputation around town, being a drunk and kind of a woman beater and things like that, having a temper, and it wasn't good. But she stuck by it. So remember Malvina, her firstborn, her beloved. Now Malvina's she's grown up. She's 18 now, and they said she grew up just like her mother. Very very beautiful, striking to the eye, however you want to call it. And so Malvina meets this boy named Mosey Haynes. I've never met somebody named Mosey before, but I kind of would like to. He was 18, had his own place, had his own business, very well off. He was a gentleman, very, very well spoken, had it together. So Nanny was like, hell yeah, marry him. So Malvina did. And within that year, Malvina had announced that she was pregnant. So think back on what I told you of how Nanny handled her children on speculation that maybe she had poisoned them, but maybe they had just had some very bad grain and it was an accidental poisoning. At this point in time, we don't know, but there's some speculation. So, Malvina ends up giving birth to her son, Robert, in 1943. Beautiful baby, beautiful, healthy boy. Um, and Nanny played the role as a caring grandmother. She said that she was a little skeptical at first and that she thought that this child ruined Melvina's life. But as she got to know Robert and actually got to play that grandmother role, that she fell more into it, was more comfortable with it, and worshipped Robert just as she did Melvina. That's her first grandbaby. About a year after that, Melvina announces she is pregnant with baby number 2. This is where things change. And I'm going to, again, your discretion advised, it's going to get bad from here on out. So, Nanny could not get over that. She was like, nope, this baby's going to ruin your life. My kids ruined my life. Mm-mm. If I would have just stuck with Melvina as my firstborn, I would have been fine. I would have had a great life, but I decided to have 3 more kids. So, speculation, I had to off 2 of them, and I just basically couldn't off the 3rd one yet. And um, that's how she thought of it. So, Melvina's first pregnancy went well. No complications. It wasn't a hard pregnancy, but baby number 2 was a completely different story. Very, very complicated pregnancy, uh, bedridden a lot of the time, and a very, very complicated and a very touch and go labor. During that time, they used ether as a method of like sedation and like pain and stuff like that. Um, which is weird. Like I remember in my science class in elementary or middle school, we used ether to make the bugs that I needed for my science project to go completely to sleep. But potato, potato. So, um, they and she's doped up. It's a very, very long labor, very complicated labor, very hard labor on her body, and she's like begging for her mom. So, what's good old Nanny Doss do? Nanny Hazel, whatever you want to call her at this time. She shows up for her beloved Melvina, but she still looks at that child as, excuse my language, a bastard child. That this child is going to ruin Melvina's life, and that she's not going to be able to fulfill her life if she would have just stuck with little Robert. And as Nanny thought, if I just would have stuck with Melvina, I would be able to fulfill my life, fulfill these romance novels, what have you. But I decided to have 3 other kids. So she gives birth to a healthy little girl, but she's so out of it and she's so tired that she doesn't have the strength to physically hold her daughter, and so she asked for the nurses to give the her daughter to her mom, and then Melvina passes out again, and she said Melvina thought this was a nightmare. She thought she was having a nightmare. So in her nightmare, she said she remembered opening her eyes, looking over at her mom that has her newborn baby, her newborn healthy daughter, cradled in her arms, reaching up, pulling a hairpin from her hat and sticking it in the soft spot of that newborn baby's skull, all the way to the brain. And that's actually exactly what she did. So I told you guys this is gonna get bad. Um, but Melvina didn't know that that was actually a reality that actually happened. Like that wasn't a nightmare. So when she comes to in a couple of hours, she's now reintroduced to the news that your healthy baby girl is now deceased. And doctors, they were looking, they couldn't find anything physically wrong. So they thought, due to the complications of the labor and delivery and stuff, that maybe she had a lack of oxygen and there was things that they couldn't see. And that's actually why she passed away. They did not do an autopsy report because of this. Same. So keep that in mind. There's going to be a trend here with autopsy reports. So she ends up going home and she tells her sister, Florine, this horrible nightmare that she had about her mother sticking a hairpin through her baby's skull into her brain. What Florine didn't tell her, and from what I read, never disclosed to her, was when they were in the waiting room and the doctors came out and were telling them that the baby had actually passed away, that Nanny was sitting there twirling a hairpin in between her fingers, and that she thought it was kind of odd. But then when Melvina decided to actually disclose that information and disclose that nightmare that she had, she was like, "Whoa!" And but she never said that to her sister. She never disclosed that to her sister because she's like, "Oh no, that must just be a coincidence." So fast forward a little bit, um, Mosey and Melvina start to kind of fall apart. Like Melvina, she's so depressed and just like can't cope with the death of her newborn baby. But it's like she kind of forgot. You still got little Robert over here, and she either A, just wouldn't get up out of bed and deal with anything, or if she did get up, she would get up going to town into the arms of another man and then into the local bar. Mosey doing the same thing. So there was one in particular time that Melvina ended up coming home with a soldier, and Nanny was pissed, and she was like, you're doing exactly what I did, and you're falling into this trap here that I did, and these are the romance novels that I want to fulfill, but I can't do them due to the lifestyle that I have chosen, so on and so forth. And so they end up getting into a huge fight. So Mosey's gone out getting some poo-tang. Florine is actually, I don't know where Florine is at this time. And then Melvina leaves to go to a bar. So that means little Robert, who's 2, and Nanny are at home by themselves. And Nanny decides she is furious. Somebody's got to pay for this. And who's that going to be? That's going to be little Robert. So Nanny loved to bake. And she would do prunes, like sweet, something, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's like a pie and it's prunes. And so, but little Robert, he really liked cookies. So what she did, and this is horrible, and this is again out of Nanny's recall when she was asked this, she said, I baked my grandkid all his favorite dishes, all his favorite sweets, and I watched the the beaming smile on his face and how happy he was that day. And he just kept smiling and smiling and smiling. And he kept saying like, Nanny, 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 I love you. As she knows what she's doing is putting arsenic in his sweets. So after he gets done eating, she puts him to bed and she goes to bed himself. Her words, I knew I was gonna wake up and not hear a sound. So what does she do? She wakes up. She doesn't hear a sound. But we are going to well, not we, but them. She went ahead and put on an Oscar winning performance and calls the doctor. She's all frantic, you know, oh my gosh, my grandson, my grandson, my grandson. And um, just going off, just absolute meltdown that her grandson is he's not waking. So doctor comes, checks him out, and diagnoses him with and I don't know if YouTube's gonna censor this, so I gotta censor myself. SIDS. We'll say that. if the technology and what we know about SIDS now versus what they knew then, they would know that those two do not correspond because Robert is over 2, and everything that I have ever known, correct me if I'm wrong, everything that I've ever researched and all the studies that I've ever looked up, so on and so forth, is it's 1 and earlier, not 2, 2.5 and up. But that is what they diagnosed him with, um, was SIDS. So no autopsy done. At little Robert's funeral, we thought that it was award winning on just a show that she gave the doctors. No, she was about to raise that bar up a couple notches. She gets so into the grief that she even flings herself into the mud at his funeral to the and as little Robert's coffin is being lowered, flings herself into the mud to the extent that the local town and family and everything, they have to help her up and start comforting her as they believe that, she's just so heartbroken because her grandson just died. And she already just endured the sudden death of her newborn granddaughter. They're just like, oh my gosh, this poor woman. Little did the town know, not this poor woman. This woman sucks. So this is where some suspicion started to rise. So you got Melvina over here. That's just like, um, I your 2 kids died when they were toddlers of grain poisoning. I leave you alone for an hour with my brand new born baby, and then they're dead. Then I leave you alone with my 2.5-year-old son, and now he's dead. Starting to see a trend here. So they ended up going and having some drinks and start discussing some things with Frank, who I've only mentioned a few times. So that is currently Nanny's husband of 16 years. He's a drunk, but they're still married and still live together and all that good stuff. Um, and Frank says some words that couldn't have been any truer. So they're starting to make some observations and have their suspicions. And Frank makes a statement, well, I reckon I'm probably next. Yes, you are, Frankie boy. Yes, you are. So, around this time, which would be September of 1945, if you guys know anything about September 2nd of 1945, that is when the Great World War II ended. So they were celebrating that. Frank is out with his buddies, celebrating the end of World War II. And he gets absolutely freaking blasted out of his mind. So Nanny has to go pick him up. And she's not very happy with that, but she knows. So, um, sorry, I told you it's a rough one. And this, I know we got a banner at the bottom. This one gets really, really rough. So, sorry. Um, they end up getting back home. Frank was like Nanny's father. You do not tell him no. And if you tell him no, you're going to suffer the consequences of telling him no. So Frank wants to have relations. Nanny's like, no, I just picked your drunk ass up. Absolutely not. Take yourself to bed and just be done with it. Frank is furious that he wants something, he ain't getting it. Nanny just told him no, and he ends up forcing himself upon her in a very violent nature. And then he was done. She was like, I've had enough of that. So what Frank liked to do is hide his corn whiskey in their garden because if he had it in the house, Nanny would pour it out. So Frank gets up, stumbles his butt to work. Nanny goes out into the garden, finds one of those corn whiskey bottles, and was like, So she dumps a little bit of it out, goes and gets some arsenic, pours that in there, shakes it up a little bit, ties it back, puts it right back where she found it. Because she knew Frank would come home. She'd go to bed, Frank would go right back outside and drink it, which is exactly what he did. And the next day, Frankie is passed out. Well, I shouldn't say passed out because he's dead. Dead, sprawled out in the garden. Doctor comes up. She, again, award-winning performance by Miss Nanny. Doctor comes up and he's like, "Oh my gosh, there's that person." But again, if you remember back to what I said, Frank had a reputation of being a drunk. So Doctor just chalked it up as Frank drank himself to death. No autopsy was done. So get him buried, and this is the last time that Nanny sees her daughters. Because at this point, they're like, you know what? You got way too much death around you. And it seems like basically anybody that's around you that crosses you or does anything whatsoever, they die. And so, nah. But that just because her family is like that does not mean the community is like that. Community is like, oh my gosh, your two grandkids are deceased, your two kids are deceased, now your husband's deceased, you poor thing. Not ever even batting an eye to it. And so once Frank dies, Nanny actually receives a pretty healthy chunk of insurance money that she was not expecting. And I couldn't find the exact amount, but from what I was reading, it was a pretty healthy amount. So she ends up buying 10 acres in Jacksonville, Alabama, builds a cottage on it, fills it with her favorite love and romance novels, yada, yada, yada. And then she actually rented out the land, so she didn't have to take care of the land. She rented out the land, she didn't have to do anything. And she was very financially secure. But that good old thing comes right back around. She's feeling quite lonely. So what she do? She goes back to that lonely hearts column. And this is where she wants to pursue her biggest dream, her biggest fantasies, finding a man who made those beloved romance novels and fulfill them, make them, instead of a dream, make them become a reality. Just treat her well, yada, yada, yada. And Nanny's not poor anymore. Nanny's got a newfound wealth. So she can up her game a little bit. And it's not just, oh, I can only scale down here. I'm going to go up here. Which, I mean, I guess she should have done. Or she shouldn't have done any of this, but that's beside the point. But she decided, I'm gonna upgrade. I'm not gonna date another drunk or somebody that beats me or anybody like my father or anything like that. Is what's going through her mind. She's like, nope, my dad beat me. My two ex-husbands beat me. Mm-mm. I'm gonna upgrade. She did not. So it was said that she actually had no shortage of men that wanted her, but this is where she met Arlie Lanning. He was not a local. He was actually from North Carolina, Lexington, North Carolina. He was a war vet and had a steady job running a labor crew. She went to visit him, and on the first visit that they ever met each other, they got married. I'm pretty sure I would hear an atomic boom go off if I met somebody and married them the day that I met them from like my mother and father's head. Just mm-mm. So, uh, scam artist, yes and no. Hopeless romantic, possibly. A piece of porpoise poo, absolutely. Um, So, um, yeah, this is my place. So, actually, I have to flip these two around because I forgot. This is where I got confused with all the men in Nanny's life, and I was about to tell you the wrong person. Da, 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 da. I know I have some big X somewhere. I was like, no, this is not the right person. Um, so Arlie was pretty short-lived in Nanny's life. Um, he was an alcoholic. He hid it. He was a womanizer. And then Nanny caught on to him. He was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," and actually genuinely tried to stop. Um, so Nanny, when she found out, uh, she went back to her cottage in Alabama. Instead of staying in Lexington, North Carolina, where Arlie is, she went back to Alabama. She was like, mm-mm, no, and criticized him for all the women relations that he had, drinking, stuff like that, hiding it. But as she was in Alabama, she was hitting up that Lonely Hearts column like you wouldn't believe. She was about to set fire to that newspaper with how fast she was going through. And but was she doing any wrong in her eyes? No. You got old poor Arlie over here actually trying to, you know, be a better man, admitting his faults, saying that I'm trying to do better. But Arlie was an addict. And this back and forth went on for a while. I couldn't get the exact amount. I think it was 4 years that it went on, just back and forth, back and forth. She'd go back to Lexington, he'd cheat. She'd leave. But this whole time, she's not saying what she's doing in Alabama. Um, so he uh he ends up just basically falling into her pattern. She's like, you know what? I'm tired of you. I would like some insurance money now, and makes him a prune pie, whatever that is, like the sweet prune pie or something like that. And he eats it. It has arsenic in it, and it kills him. So he dies. And then we get to Robert. So, no, who had the house? Sorry. So, there was a house that was in this. Um, but we're gonna tie that in with another guy. You get the point. So then she meets this guy named Robert. Robert is rich. So he says he's not. She meets Robert, I think like a month after Arlie dies, and marries him. She got you got Charles that she met 4 months. That's her first husband. 4 months married. They were married for 8 years. Uh, he divorces her. She marries um Robert Harrelson within 2 months. They were married for 16 years. He dies and then meets Arlie. And then I think they were married for a year. And then Arlie dies. Now we're on to Robert. Again, all the deaths, no autopsy report. Um, it was just poisoning. They said that Arlie died from a heart attack. And so then we get to um, not Robert. Richard is the next one. So Richard was supposedly rich. He was not. He was also a womanizer, and so Richard he liked the younger women. So at this time, I mean, not that Miss Nanny is old by any means, but she's getting up there versus these younger ones in their 20s that Richard tend to like. So he would go out and he would go out on the town and be like, "Oh, I'm just gonna be a few minutes," and then it'd be a few hours. And those few hours turned into more than just a few hours. Uh, we're gonna get there. I'll tell you at the very end how many hubbies she had total. Um, so Where is the number one place that you would go if you're like, hmm, where can I go in town to find all of the gossip and the latest gossip? And she was like, oh, I know. Let's go to the local hair salon because they know everything. So that's exactly what she did. And I think that's where she found out Richard is not just, out on a business trip talking about some business things going on with his local business partners about this big business move. No, what's Richard doing? He's doing the business with a capital B and an exclamation point at the end. Doing the business. Props to him. And so she finds this out. She's like, oh my gosh, no. But she's patient. So she goes to Richard's life insurance policy and goes to those brokers. And she was like, hi, I would like to take out an additional life insurance policy. Not one, but two. And they didn't bat an eye to it. And this is where she found out Richard is not as rich as he seemed. She was like, you know what, you bastard? As Gabby would say, you bastard. I'm gonna I'm just gonna go ahead and max them out. So she did. And then what'd she do? She fed Richard some prunes. Because Richard's like, I'm hungry. She's like, I'm sure you are. Here's some prunes. And Richard died. Again, no autopsy report. Here's where some suspicion, even though there should have been suspicion long before this, here's where suspicion started to gather. Richard forgot to put his life insurance stuff and all, like, he forgot to change his will on one particular part, which is his house. So Richard dies. Richard's mom's still alive. So she's like, Nanny's over here, like, oh, I'm going to be the damsel in distress here, but also I'm going to be just the most selfless woman ever, and I'm going to take care of Richard's mom. So as she's doing this, she's like, I think I'm going to sell this house. Well, you can't sell a house that doesn't belong to you because he didn't change his will, and his sister actually was the one that got it. She was furious. So what does any good old furious woman do that likes to give prunes with arsenic in it? What do? They're gonna set your house on fire. And that's exactly what she did, and that's where some suspicion started to raise. But was it enough suspicion? No, no, it wasn't. You would think, but it was not. So the town's kind of like, there's a lot of deaths around you. You just also that house just burned down, but so the house was not in her name. It was in the sister's name, but the house insurance was in her name. So once that thing burned to the ground, who got it? Who got all the insurance money out of it? Nanny. So then she ends up taking care of the mother for a little bit, gets tired of her, and is like, here's some prunes. So she dies. And then everybody thought it was like, okay, she's just old. No, I was not. So then we get to, I feel like I'm forgetting somebody. No. Then we get to Samuel. Oh, Sammy boy. Thank God for Sammy boy. This is where she gets her last name, Doss. So, Richard died. They married in 1952. He died in 1953. Just right into 1954, she married Samuel. Samuel's not anything like the rest of them at all. He is a good old Southern country boy, but is also like a Mormon, and like he is by his faith. To the extent you did not want, like you could not read a romance novel around him. He forbid that in his house. Um, she had to go to bed by 9:30. She could only watch like certain shows. Don't backtalk him. Anything like his money was his money. She was supposed to be the loving wife, stay home, little house on the prairie, whatever. Um, and he did not tolerate anything beyond that. He wasn't physically um, smacky smacky towards it. I gotta be careful with YouTube. Again, I'm not trying to be disrespectful towards that um, physically, but he let it be very known. So she was like, no. Here's the problem. Nanny is used to having it where I can feed you some sweets. I can feed you a pie. I can make you some cookies. What have you? And you go, night night. Samuel, just like myself, this is why you shouldn't eat sweets. Doesn't like sweets. So she's like, how in the world? Sorry if that was really loud because that was really loud in my ears. How in the world do I give this man arsenic if I can't put it in his pie? She's like, all right, so I guess I'm gonna put it in his coffee. Here's the thing: she's used to mass amounts of arsenic at, like, at once. You can't do that in somebody's coffee. You're gonna taste it. So she's like, all right, I'm just gonna do some small little swirls here. So Samuel ends up getting really sick, as anybody that is digesting small amounts of arsenic would, duh, and goes to the hospital. He's in the hospital for 23 days. The doctor was like, you just have a really, really bad um, infection in your intestine, in your digestive system, digestive tract. And he's like, oh, okay. So they ended up giving him some antibiotics and send him home. And I'm really trying to find, I think it's on my phone. So this doctor is a bad person. So old Sammy boy goes home and Nanny's like, I'm sorry, but you're still walking, breathing, talking in here. No, we can't have that. So she's like, I'm gonna make you a really big dinner because you just spent 23 days in the hospital. You must be hungry. And he was like, yes, Nanny, starving. So she does. She makes some lamb chops and some collard greens and a bunch of other things. And he eats it all. And then he passes away. He's like, my tummy hurts. And she's like, yes, yes, it does. Um, ends up going and passes away. What Miss Nanny Doss did not expect, and this is what got her caught, is Miss Heidi William Dean, who was the doctor, would question the passing of Samuel Doss. Not because, yes, Southern collard greens, um, not because he thought anything of foul play, but because he was a med student and he was actually the valedictorian of his class, and he was like, WTF, like, where did I just mess up on this? Like, I want to know as a, no, he was a male doctor. Where did I mess up? So I know further into, like, into the future and forever what to look for, because what I diagnosed him with and then all of a sudden he turns around and passes away, that doesn't make sense. So he ends up coincidentally timing this perfectly, where Miss Nanny Doss, she's sitting there just like, oh, poor pitiful me, and the dumb town around is like, oh, poor pitiful you. You have a ton of death around you, but oh, poor pitiful you. He says, hey, do you mind if I do an autopsy on him? Just because I want to know for myself on, like, what I messed up on so I don't make the same mistake in the future. She's got a bunch of locals around her. Who in their right mind is going to say no? But bye, Papa. Thanks for stopping by. So she says, yeah, he does an autopsy. Per his autopsy report, I found enough arsenic in Mr. Doss's system to take down a horse, if not elephant. That's a lot of arsenic. So that obviously is a red flag. And so then he calls the police. The police start doing their investigation, and for once, thank God, they actually were thorough and they did it correctly. Props to them. They should get an award. Um, Went back through all the history, end up exhuming all but 2 bodies. All of them. Arsenic, 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 arsenic. So a couple deaths that I missed there. I skipped over. Her sister got really sick. I think it was some sort of cancer. She ended up going to Kansas to go see her throughout the midst of all of this, and she was just like, "Hey, you're sick. You're gonna die anyways. I'm gonna help you along." So she did that to her, um, offed her, and then she found out that her dad had passed away, and then got mad because there wasn't any revenge there to do. So she moved back to Blue Mountain with her mother at the farm. Was like, hey, I'll take care of your farm. Paid all that off, and then moved her to Alabama to her cottage. Got mad that her mom was like, no, you can't read the Lonely Hearts column. And then she actually upgraded to like the Diamond Club call. I don't know. It was the 1900s of Tinder. I don't know. Got mad at her, so offed her with some prunes. It's just prunes for everybody. So you got husband number 2, husband number 3, husband number 4, husband number 5, 2 grandkids, sister, mother, uh, 2 in-laws, and I want to say somebody else. 12 total. 12 deaths total. And they actually only could hit her for one. So in 1954, she was hit with the death of Samuel Doss. And she was tried for it, obviously. And so October 1954, she was apprehended. She pled guilty May 17th of 1955. She was like, "Yeah, all right, I did that." But the way that it was at the hearing, like in the courtroom, there was questions that were asked, and she was like, "Yeah, like okay, I unalived the rest of them as well. My bad." And she called them her little sweet prunes, or her little prune pies, is what she referred to them as in court. So the problem was Kansas, Oklahoma, or yeah, Kansas, North Carolina, Alabama, and another county in Oklahoma had actually tried her for all of the other unalivings that happened, or charged her, but they never tried her. So she was actually only convicted for Samuels. And during that time, it was not a pleasant thing for women to be given the unaliving penalty. And so the judge said, the only reason I'm not sentencing you to the unaliving penalty is strictly because you are of the female gender. If you are of the male gender, you be getting a little shocky shocky. And So therefore, she went ahead and was given life without parole in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Um, and then she was diagnosed with leukemia shortly after that, a couple years after that. There's an eerie thing that was actually talked about is she said that she kept asking when the kitchen staff was short, she would volunteer, and that she did not understand why the kitchen staff at the state penitentiary would not allow her to work. I don't know, Miss Doss. I couldn't imagine why the kitchen staff might tell you no. You psycho. So in 1965, which was actually the 10-year mark of her being in the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, she succumbed to the leukemia and passed away in the hospital ward. Her burial site is actually at Oak Hill Memorial Park in Oklahoma. Um, and then I think it's McAlester, Oklahoma. Mom, is that is that where we went? I gotta go back to my chat. I just realized I closed all that out. So I have not been reading my chat whatsoever, but that is the lovely story of Nanny Doss. Um, heck yeah, well, sorry that that seemed a little, probably, maybe a little bit confusing, a little jumbled. I don't have a lot of time to do this, and I kind of just threw this together just to get this going. Because I'm really excited about this series. Speaking of this series that we're going to be kicking off, that we just kicked off today, we are actually going to be changing our time to noon, Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. Instead of 10 or 10:30 Eastern Standard Time, we are going to, I think I said that correctly. I say Eastern Mountain Volcano Time so much that when I actually say legitimate time, I get thrown off. Um, so we're actually going to be changing that to noon, Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and trying to kick this off just a little bit more. So again, I hope that I wasn't too jumbled with this stuff. I know Gabby and Flashfan and my mother have a have their own, and I'm super super excited for them. They are way more put together than I am, so I'm really really excited for them. So stay tuned for them. I hope you all have a great rest of the day. I hope you all had a very Merry Christmas. We do apologize for our absence. It's There's nothing going on with court right now, so we just been spending time with the family and just enjoying the holidays, enjoying that super baby that we got, and just loving one another. So, all right, stay golden. We will see you all soon, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye.